Thank you all for coming. This is a topic that, as you'll see, I feel very strongly about, and so I love talking about it, which you'll probably notice that too. So, gender inclusive software. How do gender and software relate to each other? So I guess the bottom line is most software has gender biased bugs in it. By most software, I mean, like I've only seen one so far that doesn't. So that would be most software. You're kidding? One says, where? Answer, in the software you create. Answer, in the tools you use to create it. It's everywhere. So, oh gosh, how much does this really matter? Answer, a lot. Everybody who runs into these things is paying like a cognitive tax every time they run into one of these gender biased bugs. Okay? It's constantly sapping away at the brain cells. And there's another reason to care. Market share. Women drive 70 to 80% of consumer purchasing, according to a recent article in Forbes magazine. Women are dubbed the largest emerging market, according to the Harvard Business Review, more than double another emerging market that we sometimes talk about, China and India, more than double China's and India's GDP combined. Okay, but maybe you don't care about money. Maybe you don't care about the social justice case. How about better software? So it turns out, this is well known in the design community. If there are designers in the audience, you've probably heard of this, that addressing an underserved population segment often helps everyone. And the classic example is curb cuts. You know, those cutout places in the sidewalks? Way back in the old days, there were no curb cuts. And somebody noticed a situation of somebody like that, somebody in a wheelchair having to deal with sidewalks and no curb cuts, and said, this is terrible, and curb cuts were born. And they did help people with wheelchairs. And they helped people with walkers too, those wheeling walkers. They helped those people. And they helped mothers pushing their babies in strollers. And they helped people on bicycles. And they helped people pushing dollies with heavy bales of hay on them. And they help the few people in the world that have those suitcases that have wheels on them. Seen those? Okay. So when you study the world through the eyes of an underserved population, you see things you never saw before that affect everyone. Okay, so now hopefully you all have religion about this. You all want to do something about this for one reason or another, but I'm going to tell you what not to do before I tell you what to do. Shrink it and pink it. This is not a strategy. This is a thing, by the way. In case you've never heard of this, you can find this easily on Google. Yeah, shrink it and pink it. How many of you know the story of Dell's pink laptops, 2009? Yeah, this is a good one, isn't it? Yeah, so at some point, Dell decided they wanted to expand their markets, and so to pick up the women's market, so they painted their laptops pink, and they may have made them a little smaller too, and they put up a website to go with recipes and stuff. Sorry, this is very funny. Guess how long that website lasted? Can you guess? What? 6 months? No, guess smaller. 2 days? Somebody said 2 days? No, guess smaller. Guess smaller. 20 minutes. That they were so embarrassed after the outcry, after 20 minutes, they took it down. Then there's Bic for her. Surely you know this one. Okay, so Bic decided they wanted to expand their markets, and so they took their Bic pens and they painted them pink and purple and added sparklies and a label for her and raised the price. Have you seen the blog by Ellen about these? Anybody seen this? It goes something like this. Oh, my feeble hand. Prior to this product, I couldn't write all by myself. I had to get my husband to do it. But now, thanks to this wonderful product, I'm empowered to write my own diaries. Okay, so these things are not going to expand your market. All of these things you were hoping for are not going to happen with Shrink It and Pink It. So if you ever run into anybody in your company that says, well, what are we supposed to do? Should we paint it pink? Please don't let them do that. And the reason that that doesn't work is because nobody is typical. Okay, they're actually, you can't have products for typical females and typical males because there isn't a single one of those beings in the whole wide world. And so if you went to double the expense to have 2 versions of your product, you'd be building 2 expensive products that would work for absolutely nobody. Because being a man or a woman or any other gender is a very complicated proposition with a whole lot of different variables, so you just can't slice the world that way. So that's a problem. And so then we say, well, what do we do then? Are we supposed to have 1 million different versions? No, you have to think about it at a smaller granularity. So it can't be about whole systems. It has to be about individual barriers, one at a time, that are biased against one group or another. And you think of those barriers as bugs, and you think about getting rid of them as a debugging task, okay? So that's the key. And so, yeah, so it's gotta be about debugging, not about dividing. So that's kind of the bottom line. If you have to leave, now you've gotten the bottom line there. Okay, oh, but wait, you wanna maybe find out how to do it. Okay, so have I got a deal for you? The way you find the bugs is with a method that my collaborators and I have been working on for years and years and probably will always be working on because we're academics, we're never done. Called the GenderMag Method. And it's free, so I'm not trying to sell you anything. But in fact, if you go to gendermag.org, you can just sort of download everything. So it is a software process. You do this with your team. Okay, you use this process to evaluate your own software product's inclusiveness, looking for these gender biased bugs so that you can take them down. And by the way, just to avoid confusing you, I'm talking about bugs that the users can see with their eyeballs. I'm not talking about under the hood algorithmic biases. That's a whole nother story. But things that affect the workflow and the way people problem solve while they're using the software. So over the hood. Anyway, the scope is problem solving. So anytime your software involves some sort of problem solving in which the user is scratching their head trying to figure something out, that's the right setup for GenderMag. At some point, we thought it was only for problem solving software, like debugging tools and requirements tracing and decision support and data visualization systems. That's what we thought. And then we started using it on everything. We found out, gosh, most user interfaces are so terrible. People have to problem solve to just do it. So they're always problem solving. Anytime the human is problem solving, that's the right place for GenderMag to help, which turns out to be almost all software. Okay, so what actually is this GenderMag thing? Well, it's made up of some personas. Actually, they're multi-personas, and you'll meet one in a minute. And these personas are all based on cognitive styles. So what you're going to find out soon is that this is all about the way people go about problem solving. It's not really about gender identification at all. But if you ignore these problem solving styles, you will be biasing against different genders. Usually turns out to be women, but not always. Okay, so we have these personas and we embed them in a process that sort of walks you through a particular set of questions for each persona. So let's just, and I'm also going to talk about a whole bunch of ways to get involved in this kind of work so that you can go out there and sort of walk the talk and help me change the world. Okay, so how it works. You start by picking one of our personas and customizing it. You haven't met Abby yet. I'll introduce her soon, but right now I pick Abby. So there we are. That part's done. Then you pick some sort of use case or scenario in your software product that you're about to evaluate. So here is a software product. Some students at OSU were building this when I captured these screenshots. And what this product is like a Google map for inside a bookstore. So you're walking around a physical bookstore with this app. And the scenario that they wanted to evaluate was find science fiction books. So Abby wants to find science fiction books in that bookstore. Okay, so far so good. And then we walk through this scenario with the sub-goals and actions that the developers had in mind that their users were supposed to want to do. And so it starts off with the first sub-goal that they were hoping Abby would have if she wanted to find science fiction books. So they decided they would like her to want to see a map. So that's okay. They're allowed to want her to do anything they want. So okay, that's the first sub-goal. And then we ask ourselves, will Abby have formed this sub-goal? Yes, no, maybe, and why? Okay? So if what we want is inclusive software, then we want the process to be inclusive as well. So usually the software team is sitting there in the room answering that question, and we want to harvest, we want the union of their opinions. What we don't need is a consensus. Okay? So the soft-spoken ones, the loud-spoken ones, the bosses, the janitors, we don't care, we just want it all. Okay? So we write it all down. Some people say, yes, she will have this sub-goal, and here's why. Some people say, no, she will not have that sub-goal, and here's why. And they're basing it on her cognitive styles, which are all enumerated in the personas. So after we've harvested all that, somebody's written it down, what we have is the beginning of a usability bug report. And if some of the reasons they said no involve particular problem-solving styles, then we also have a gender bias bug report. And sooner or later, we can integrate this in with other bug reports. Okay, so there we go. So they answer it, and then we push that sub-goal into her head. So maybe she didn't have it before, but she's got it now. That's so we can move on with the analysis. And then we start thinking about action. So if she has this sub-goal, she wants to see the map, what did the developers want her to do? Well, they wanted her to push the browse off button. This is how you can tell they were students, okay? Because if you want to see a map, tapping browse off doesn't seem terribly logical, but okay. If they already knew that, they wouldn't need me, would they? Anyway, so okay, that's what they wanted. And then we again ask, will Abby do that? Yes, no, maybe, and why? And then we take her hand, Abby is just a persona, so we're allowed to do this, and make her push that button or tap that thing. And then we see what happens next, what the screen looks like, and then we say, if she takes that action, will she be able to see that she's making progress toward her goal? Yes, no, maybe, and why? So we do that over and over and over again. So we're done with the scenario. At the end, what we have is a bug report. Here was one reason one of the people said that she probably wouldn't, because Abby's cognitive style is such that she's disinclined to push and poke as her learning style. All right, so let's look at behind the scenes, now that you have a general idea of how things work. So we have 4 multi-personas. Personas are fake users. Ours are fake users that represent 3 points on a spectrum of cognitive styles. Abby has the points that are over here. These points are common among women and some other people, but favored by more women than any other gender. And they are very far away from these. These are the facets that Tim has. These are very common in men, and we've chosen common facets of each that are as far away from each other as possible to get a range, to cover the whole range. And then the Pats pick up some points in the middle. The Pats, by the way, are identical twins. Well, they don't look identical, but oh well. Okay, and the 5 cognitive facets that make up these personas are motivations. So this is not amount of motivation, this is reasons why somebody is using the software. Their information processing style, their computer self-efficacy, their risk aversion, and their learning style and learning new technologies. So let's meet one or two of these. Here is Abby, tiny little print. Don't try to read it. All I want you to notice is it fits on one screen. Yay! So you've maybe used personas that go on for pages and pages and pages. This isn't one of those. It's intended for use by people who are in a hurry and maybe a little impatient with personas, like developers. It's got bullets, it's underlined, got boldface, it shows what's important, and so on. Now, fancy animation. If you like it, I'll do it again. Isn't that fun? Above the gray line does not matter to me. Below the gray line, you cannot touch. So the part below the gray line, these are cognitive styles all based on research. Above the gray line are things about your particular customer base that matter to you, but not to me, like their education, like their hobbies, like their job title, their age, their picture, even their name, okay, where they live. All of that stuff you can change to match your target population. Below, you can't touch. If you don't like below, use a different persona. This one's Abby. Okay? Just want to emphasize any picture will do, any socioeconomic background, any age, any gender. In fact, she doesn't have to be a woman. Okay, so let's look at one of these cognitive facets. Attitude toward risk. Abby rarely has spare time. So she is risk averse about using unfamiliar technologies that might need her to spend extra time on them. She's just trying to get her work done. She doesn't want to start fiddling around with stuff that might not work. So that's Abby. Let's look at some data. So all of our facets that we use here are backed up by at least 5 empirical studies. This is only one, okay, because I don't want to put 5 up there. As you would expect, the pink are the women and the blue are the men. And this is a fairly recent survey that was done with a large population of technology users. Now, in that survey, as you can see, 42% of the men and 25% of the women, oh yay, you can see this, were very risk tolerant in their use of technology. And so on. Oops, sorry. But one thing I want you to notice here is there is a ton of overlap. So this is another reinforcement of the point that you can't divide the world into pink people and blue people because they just don't divide that way. Tons and tons of overlap. But also notice that the distributions are very different. So when we talk about statistical differences, it's because of those differences in distribution. You can see that the men are skewing over there on this side, and the women are skewing over here on this side. So the job of the Tim persona is to look out for the interests of all of these people who are risk tolerant with technology, regardless of what gender they are. And the job of the Abby persona is to look out for the interests of these people, and the job of the Pats is to pick up the middle. All right, here comes another fancy animation. Woohoo, on the line. So, yeah, you can hardly see it on that thing. Yeah, but I'll just have to show you again. Okay, there's that vertical black line. Imagine, hypothetically, that your software only worked for the people on this side of that line. Okay, guess what? It does. It only works for those people. In that situation, in that hypothetical case, which is probably true, that means it's working for almost half of the men in this population and only about a fourth the women. That's why it's about cognition, not about gender identification, but it's gender biased in that if you ignore this, you'd be leaving out half the women, half the men, 3/4 of the women. Okay, so disproportionately more women. Okay, so you've already met Abby and seen one of the facets. Let's just kind of get to, does it even work? Where's my friend that saw the 15-minute talk? This is the part you actually saw. There you are. Yes. So we did a field study. This is 4 teams in the real world who were using GenderMag to find gender biases in their own software. So all I really want you to notice here is there was a bunch of variety. So some groups had men and women on them, some had only men, some people in the room had both developers and managers, some just had developers, some used Abby, some used Abby and Tim, different domains, different places in the software lifecycle, different envisioned kinds of users. Okay, just different. Okay, and here's what they found. So the y-axis is the percent of features they looked at, and the blue numbers are the percentage of those things where they found gender biases. Okay, so like company E, in total of all the steps they went through, 93% of those, they found something wrong. But 60% of them weren't gender biases, they were just flat out usability errors that would affect everybody. Like the font's too small. But a third actually were biased against one gender or the other. Usually that turns out to be women. And by one gender or the other, I'm referring to 2 because I have data only on 2 genders. But this is intended to be gender inclusive for all genders. So I don't want you to really think about this as a binary setup. Okay, here's the bottom line of this one, 25%. So that's the average. These are software developers looking at software they supposedly love because they wrote it, and they're using GenderMeg themselves to find gender biases, and their average is 1 out of every 4 features they're looking at, they're finding a gender bias. That's terrible, isn't it? You all think that's terrible? I think that's terrible. That blew me away. But actually the answer is even worse than that. Since that time, I did more studies, and now I have 17 teams here. Their average is 32%, 1 out of 3. This is people evaluating their own software themselves. The 0 doesn't show up. Oh, that's right, there isn't one. What's the smallest number on there? 12%. That's the smallest I've seen. Actually, that's a lie. There is one tiny use case I saw once that had a 0. But 12% is the smallest one. This graph, what's the largest one? 100%. Every single feature they looked at. Every single one. Yeah. Is that bad news or good news? You're right. It is. It's both. It's bad news because, really, 100%? It's good news because you can use this process really early in the software lifecycle. As soon as you have something you can walk through, even if it's sketched on napkins, you can use GenderMag. And so they used this when they had design sketches that had only existed for about a day and a half. And they didn't spend a dime implementing that because they found it so early. So they saved big time dollars by doing that early. Okay, that's that field study. Right, okay, so fine, 4 teams. Okay, fine, 17 teams. So let's just switch to a whole different domain. Let's look at open source tools. It turns out, you've probably heard that in open source, women are even more underrepresented than sort of in general in the software industry, like big time more underrepresented. Anyway, so Anita Sarma, who is my collaborator, has led some investigation into whether the software that drives open source, like the tools and the infrastructure itself, has gender biases. Yup, it sure does. Here's one set of results. So they found some technical barriers, basically usability bugs in tools, and 2/3 of those had gender biases in them. Okay, documentation barriers, about 2/3 had gender biases. Cultural barriers, and these are still embedded in the tools and infrastructure, not just people being nasty to each other over email. 86%, of course that's pretty small numbers, but still. Okay, now how can we understand this? This says, wow, what does this really have to do with risk? Well, we kind of need facet number 2 for this one. Facet number 2, right, just in time. information processing style. So Abby is, when you're trying to solve a problem, a lot of times you feel like you need more information about that problem. And so information processing is what you start to do. And so there are multiple kind of strategies for going about that. And Abby is a comprehensive learner. And so what she likes to do is she likes to get her head all the way around a problem before she goes forward and starts trying to solve it. In contrast, Tim is a very iterative information gatherer. So what he likes to do is get just the tiniest little bit of information, act upon it immediately, knowing he might be wrong, but it's okay, it's his style. Then act it, a tiny more little drip, act upon it, oops, bad idea, backtrack, try something else, okay? Very different styles. Both of them have advantages and disadvantages, so neither one of them is better than the other or worse. But anyway, but they're not both supported in software. So let's look at this a little bit. I just explained this about Abby versus Tim. And so if we go back to our tools then, we can understand more about these gender biases in the open source infrastructure and tools I was talking about. So here we are, and let's just look at the documentation barriers, this middle thing. So that's part of OSS infrastructure. It's, all the stuff that's there that's supposed to tell you how to go forward. And so here is what one of the open source teams who was analyzing this software said. They said the resources provided would be counterproductive to the way Abby likes to learn. They're, again, analyzing their own stuff. She would get lost down a rabbit hole of information trying to get all the things she needs to know. All right, so that helps you understand how these cognitive biases are also gender biases and how they play out in these tools and software themselves. So this is what the developers said about how Abby would get into trouble. But would she really? I mean, let's just ask the people who are experiencing them. Okay, we did. We got a diary. We got several diaries. And here is one of the people. And this participant said about the documentation, there's a lack of details. Within about 8 minutes, so they're plowing around in here for 8 minutes looking for the good stuff, I realized that the issue will not ever give me the details I need. Okay? So a complete mismatch for that person's learning style. Now, did they bend themselves around to some other learning style? Yeah, probably. Will that be costly to them cognitively? Yes. Okay? Why do we want people to work at some unoptimal way for themselves? And why do we want everybody to think alike anyway? I mean, don't we know that the whole reason that all these companies are trying to promote diversity is that diversity of thought is good for business and good for creativity and quality? So let's not have our software stamp it out by making everyone think the same. Okay. Okay, are there any other unlevel playing fields? Yes. Programming environment. There's empirical data to show it. Spreadsheets. There's empirical data to show it. E-learning. There's empirical data to show it. Robotics. There's empirical data to show it. Mobile apps. Oh my God. Health systems even. The very thing that's supposed to solve the problem. Websites. Anybody have a website? Okay, please look at them. Digital libraries, okay? All of these things have empirical data out there and published about these gender differences. And not all of them by me. Okay, more field data. So we also used a method called action research at Microsoft. This was a couple years ago. Action research is a form of field study, but it's very hands-on. So the researchers, that would be people like me, can change things as we're doing it, as we find out what's working and what's not. The people there are also researchers by definition because it's a partnership, and they can change things too. So you don't have like a treatment that you drop in there and don't touch until it's all over. You keep working with it. So it's like a really active field study. Anyway, so I did this at Microsoft, and That's a picture of the Microsoft campus, really big. And the question we were after is, can we land something kind of sort of like GenderMag, some variant of it, in real software at a real company, and how can that work? And my Microsoft collaborators were really awesome. So action research starts with an unfreeze stage. So somebody has to say, we have a problem. If nobody's saying that, you can't really go forward. Somebody has to realize there's a problem worth solving. But I was lucky. I landed at the perfect time to be trying to pursue this kind of investigation, because a new CEO had just come to power, Satya Nadella, and he had just sort of put out this vision statement that said he wanted to empower every person on the planet to achieve more. So that's diversity. And he really meant it. This wasn't just something that was going out to the press. This was something he was pushing down and saying to his managers, this is part of what you're going to be evaluated on. And they're pushing it down to their people and saying, this is part of what I'm going to be evaluated on, so this is part of what you're going to be evaluated on, and so on. So I showed up there, and there are these engineers saying, how am I supposed to do this? I don't have any tools. How can I proceed? And here I am to save the day with GenderMag. And so it all just sort of clicked together at the right time. But there's an important lesson to be learned here, and that is if you go after trying to make something more inclusive, somebody in a decision-making position needs to say, I care. Because if they don't say, I care, it's really hard for the people below to do stuff because it may not fit into their day jobs. But if somebody above says, I want people to kind of work on this and figure out how it's going to work for us, then they have permission. It also needs to matter to the lowest levels, because if they don't care, it still won't get done. So you need the top down and the bottom up. It doesn't have to be the CEO. It can be, head of UX or head of the product or whatever, but somebody has to say it's in your day jobs. And then people below have to say, I care. And that's exactly the situation I was in here. After the unfreeze stage, then you have the change stage. Somebody saying, okay, let's try doing something now that we've admitted we have a problem. And so, surprise, gender is politically perilous. Who knew? And so what can happen is people can be afraid to talk about gender biases because they're afraid they're going to offend somebody, or they're afraid they don't know enough about it and somebody's going to say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. I read something and you're just dumb. Or it can be viewed as sort of optional. Yeah, like gender's really, all of this stuff, it's really important, but we have our bugs to fix, okay? So all of these, or our stuff doesn't have any biases, okay? Of course not. So all of these things can get in the way. But my first team group there really needed it. So the product that they were working on, half of their target market was women, and they knew it was not working very well for women. And what the product group lead said is, if I can't make my product work for Abby, I'm going to fail. So he knew he needed it. And he led the first group of teams forward. The very first thing they did is the very first walkthrough, they found gender biases in 27% of their features, and then they started harder scenarios and the number got higher. So he started evangelizing it, and other teams started trying it. One of the things that we found out is that using GenderMag, you can talk about gender without talking about gender at all. You can talk about risk aversion. You can talk about technology learning style. You can talk about information processing style. You never have to say the word gender, and you're still helping to address gender biases. Put another way, many gender biases are cognitive biases, and many cognitive biases are gender biases. So after they do some changing and stuff, then things start to solidify. I'm not sure that we're actually at the solidify part, but here are some outcomes. So GenderMag sort of got deconstructed. One team liked the personas, but maybe not the cognitive walkthrough so much. Other people like the cognitive walkthrough, maybe not the personas so much. Other people just like the vocabulary, but it turned out that it's pretty malleable, and people could take what they wanted and work it into their processes and make progress. So at least 12 products that I know about changed, but then my NDA ran out, and now they don't talk to me about it anymore. Bummer. Here's what one person said. I rewrote the compiler error messages, product X. Somebody else said, we're working on a whole bunch of new features in the next version of product D. And by the way, product D is a really big product. One user experience report said, we've gotten very positive responses from both novice and experienced customers. So that was my field study at Microsoft. That's been published in the form of a short paper, so you can find it hanging off my webpage somewhere. So all right, you find all this stuff, but how do you fix it? How did the Microsoft fix these things? Well, it turns out that the key is in these facets. So you're doing this thing and you're saying, you know, Abby's not going to push and poke at things. She's looking for a process to follow. And so that's why she's not going to do it. And so then that sort of leads you to say, duh, why don't we make the process clearer? Sort of falls out, okay? Because when you're finding these things, the great thing about this process is that it's theory-based. And so when you find something, you know why. When you bring in users, which you should always do anyway, you get a better grounding in reality, but you tend to not know why things aren't working out, okay? Here, you know why. So you really need both. But GenderMeg you can do earlier than you can do user studies. Well, some user studies. Anyway, okay, the fastest point in the right direction. So here's disinclined to push and poke, leading to sort of getting more systematic. So you find something, you come up with a solution based on the facet that you found it with, and then you try gendermagging it again to see whether you think things got better. Okay, so that's how they've been doing it very recently. So step one, they pinpoint the bugs using GenderMeg. Step two, just as I said, they derived the fixes from those facets. Step three, they evaluate the fixes again using a sort of a discount thing that we do called GenderMeg moments. And then what they did is they brought in some participants. I love this graph that you're about to see. I hope you love it too. Anyway, just to compare their use of the before version of the software versus the after version. Here's the before version. This is failures per participant on a task. The women averaged 1.7 failures per task. The men, 0.8 failures per task. The women were failing twice as much after all. Look at that. The gender gap completely disappeared and everyone got better. Just like curb cuts. Isn't that awesome? You can't find that on my webpage. We just submitted that, and if it doesn't get accepted, I will die. Okay. GenderMeg goes to college. We have more stuff. So one of the things about working on trying to make the world a more equitable place, trying to make software better, trying to make everything better, is that it shouldn't be relegated into a hobby. You know, you have to try to figure out some way to work it into your day job. And so when making your software gender inclusive turns out to be just a debugging task, now it's in your day job, okay? So we're trying to do that in the classroom as well. Instead of, oh, there's a whole diversity course you can take and memorize and forget, and then we get back to the regular courses, okay? Instead, what we're trying to do is show ways to integrate teaching bits and pieces of GenderMeg right into the mainstream DS classes. So we just started this a year ago, and we've put together some teaching resources. So if anybody in here teaches computer science, please wave. No one. Yay, yay. Okay, good. Have we got a deal for you? We've got all these resources. You can integrate it into software engineering classes, HCI classes, web design classes, game design classes, anything that has a front end in which you have your students creating stuff. And it's all there, all free at gendermag.org. We only started doing this one a year ago. And look at that. Oops. This just shows all the wonderful resources. There we are. Look at that. 15 universities are already doing it. Okay? If you start doing it too, send me email and I'll add you to this list. You're trying to read them all. You're craning and looking. Just go to the website. Okay. Okay, let's see here. I just said all that, so I won't say it again. Now, you all are truly inspired at this point. You all want to join me in walking the talk, and so you're just saying, how can I do this? And I'm going to tell you the answer. In practice, you can use GenderMeg on the software you're creating. Please do this. I can guarantee you your software has gender biases in it. If you teach in class, teach it. If you are an open source fan, jump right in there. We have a GenderMag tool that intends to make GenderMag sessions go a little easier. It takes notes for you and stuff like that. The tool's kind of crummy, needs some work. Jump in there and make it better, please. In research, you can apply it, extend it, blend it, study it, automate it, and if you do that, a Best Paper Award, no doubt, will be yours. You can help with our emerging best practices. This is something that we are galloping forward on right now. We're trying to figure out design patterns, things that you can just say, okay, we ran into this thing, tinkers will use it, non-tinkers won't, what can we do? So we're trying to put together resources for people to say, well, here are some things that have worked. Okay, but we need data for that, and we need collaborators for that. So if you want to help us do that, that'd be awesome. Please contact me. That would be very helpful. So in conclusion, debiasing your software pays off in business, in the classroom, your software in society. Here's what one person at Microsoft said. It gave me a way to think, to address issues that will benefit everyone, especially women. And another person said it changed the way I think. So that's it. Here's a whole bunch of resources. I'm going to only leave this slide up for a second, and then I'll go back to the conclusion one and open for questions. Okay, just to snap, 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 and I'm going to go back. Snap, snap, snap. Oh, yay, cameras are coming out. And we are done with the camera taking. Okay, back to this. Okay.
All right, well, please join me in thanking Dr. Burnett for the talk. And we have some time for questions. So I will hand the mic off here.
I was wondering if you had any research on if a company was more diverse, if you saw better ratings for GenderMag and products that they were producing.
Yeah, it's a great question. The answer is no, but I think it would have been yes if there were a lot more diversity in the early days of software. So a problem is that now we're all stuck in this sort of inertia. Yeah. And so we have these patterns in our heads of and boxes that we live in. This is the way software works. And so unless you have truly outside the box thinkers in that diverse group, then it's really hard to get outside the box.
Thank you, Professor. Beforehand, you and I were speaking, and you were talking about biases on websites, and you touched on it briefly. Mm-hmm. Is there a tool or something that you have experience with that works well for scrubbing for biases on a website?
No, but you know what? I think you should write one. I think that would be awesome, and use anything from GenderMag that you want to, and that would be awesome. There is so much room for work in this space. Yes, please do that. Love the idea.
Does it make sense to kind of baseline your users?
Where are you?
Yeah, I'm running.
Oh, yay. Okay.
Does it make sense to baseline your users? Because could it be that accountants all sort of skew to one cognitive style, or people that are doing orienteering are all, clustered in one area, so that you would want to design your software for that cognitive style rather than designing it for everybody?
So I haven't seen it be like that. Here's what I usually see. Let's say, for example, risk aversion, okay, or risk tolerance with software. So in one, say, age group, you might have men's risk tolerance statistically, women's risk tolerance. In some other age group, it might look like this. In some job titles, it might look like this. So I always see these gender gaps, but these are always relative to the peer group. So for the accountants, you're going to see it, okay? But it might be different than for software developers or janitors. Yeah. Yes.
Have you considered using gender non-binary different archetypes in this? Because to me, it feels like perhaps you're sustaining an archetype by applying Abby to risk averse versus, was it Tim? To more risk tolerant.
Okay, so I think what you're saying is this sort of exacerbating stereotypes? Yeah, we actually have research on that, and the answer is no, it's not. But we've also done things to really try to counteract that. So one thing that we've done that I haven't shown in the talk yet, but that'll be coming out soon, is we're actually just changing the spelling of our personas. So Abby, who is right now ABBY, is going to turn into ABI, which is a lot more ambiguous kind of spelling. We already, of course, have the multiple pictures, which is, I think, the most important thing that we've done. And we're working on a tool that enables you to, when you customize the personas to the demographics that you want, it generates it, and so you can put in whatever pronouns you want to, and so it just makes it a lot easier than what we've got now. But on that study that we did, we had a stereotyping expert on that team, and so what we did is we compared Abby with just one picture, the four-tuple Abby, or the four-picture Abby, and we compared those with just stereotyping behavior and conversation when that stuff wasn't around. And we used not only analysis of people's conversations, but also questionnaires that they filled out and even eye tracking. And so what we found out is even with the single picture, people were stereotyping less with Abby than they did just in regular conversation. And with the four-tuple, the four pictures, it was even better. And my favorite graph of all of that is if stereotyping was going on. Well, okay, so what we did at the end is we said, do you have any friends or acquaintances who remind you of Abby? And so they'd name some people and we'd ask why, and what we were interested in was the genders, but we didn't tell them that. And do you have any friends that totally opposite of Abby? And so, yeah, again, we were interested in the genders. And so if they were stereotyping, what we would have found out is they would have had a lot of females that reminded them of Abby and hardly any males that reminded them of Abby. But instead, what we got was this, all the way across, and the same with the totally opposite thing. So that made me very happy.
Hey, I'm wondering if you could give a little insight into how you developed these personas.
Yes, I could. If you go to the website, I think this link works, may be broken, but it's supposed to work. Anyway, if you go to the website, there's a link that takes you to the Personas Foundation documents. And so there, pretty much every paragraph in the persona has footnotes and sources of where the foundational research came from. And so when we picked those 5 facets, one of our criteria was that it had to be substantiated by at least 5 independent empirical studies. So these things are sort of rock solid. Not sort of, they're rock solid. Yeah, but you can see for yourself. Uh-oh, battery?
So that one works. Once you've identified a bug and you're looking for better approaches, do you most often arrive at solutions that are mutually beneficial, like the curb cuts, or do you start getting tensions between something that works better or doesn't work so well for another persona?
Usually you end up in curb cut territory, but that isn't 100% true. Even so, all of this is meant to be about inclusiveness. So I advocate against trading off one population for another, but sometimes people feel like they really need to because such and such a population is so important to them. So one of the people who wrote me originally, well, never mind, I guess I don't know enough background to be able to expand on that one. But anyway, so usually what it comes down to is it's either a matter of fixing something that's just so broken it helps everyone, or giving options about a way to go about things. So one of my favorites that I've seen work several times is expandable, pinnable tooltips. So tooltips are meant for the TIMs. Tiny droplet of information, then you're expected to act upon it immediately. Tiny other little droplet, okay? And so it's great for TIMs, so you don't want to take those away. But for people who would like to sort of get a lot of information before they go forward and more in depth and maybe process it non-linearly, if you can allow them to pin the tooltips and once they're up there to expand them, okay, so that there's more stuff, now you've got something that works for both Abby and Tim, because Tim doesn't have to expand them or pin them at all. So they're just working like they always did. But Abby is getting what she needs to be able to develop the understanding to go forward. Yes. Hello.
Hello.
Oh, yes.
I'm actually over here.
Where? Wave at me.
In the corner.
That corner. Hi.
So what interests me most about the topic is transitioning from a binary to a non-binary standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And as a white man myself, race is definitely something that I strongly want to cater to the form of communication that best translates for people.
Yeah. Let's see here. So you have 2 questions. One of them is non-binary and the other is race, or?
I mean, if we applied the same non-binary concept, because
I
there's
see.
obviously
To race. Okay.
7 or want to consider our heritage.
Yeah, great question. So an easy one to talk about is age, because a lot of us know a lot about differences between old people and young people, or at least we know a little. And so if you were to slice the world in your head that way, sort of the continuum of age instead of the continuum of genders, and if you use GenderMeg on that, it probably wouldn't hurt anything. But one thing that's seriously missing from our list of 5 facets would be a memory facet, which would be very, very important for thinking about age differences, but doesn't come up at all with gender. So what that says is you'd have to go back to the foundations to get just the right facets. So if you wanted to do it really well, you'd have to go back to plowing around in like gerontology literature and stuff like that to make sure that you had the right ones. But what I'm pretty sure of is you'd still have risk. So risk tolerance would still be in there. You'd probably still have computer self-efficacy. It wouldn't surprise me if you also had information processing style, although that one might wrinkle a little differently, but you'd have to get memory in And yeah, I'm not quite sure what else would change. But if you had just the right facets, then the process would work exactly as we have it if you could replace the facets.
Little follow-up. Don't you think it would be more accepted across society when it's not so black and white and binary? And if we start pitching these sort of concepts to people, not as male, female, young, old,
Oh, so
long hair, short hair.
yeah. So I think that, I mean, it's sort of like if you don't have endpoints, which is really what we've got, is we've got really these, for the gender world, we've got these spectra of these facets, but our two main personas are hitting the endpoints, which are maybe making it seem more binary, and then we have somebody in the middle. And the reason that we did that is that otherwise you get this sort of persona explosion. And so if you aren't picking up the endpoints, if you're saying, well, we've got this one and this one and this one and this one, it seems like you need a really large number of personas to be able to get at everything. So that's why we went about it in that way. We thought of these as endpoints, but not dividers. Thank you.
Hello. I had a question.
Wait. Oh, I don't know where you are. Oh, yay. Okay. Hi.
A question about something you said about, I took a picture, it was the unfreeze stage.
Oh, yeah.
And you mentioned that Microsoft, their CEO was completely bought in from the beginning. And you also said that it's kind of a top and bottom down process. Yes.
Yeah, top down, bottom up. Yeah.
Okay. So do you have any examples of bottom up kind of leading to top and bottom up, or top down, bottom up, where you don't necessarily start with top down and that being successful at kind of inclusive thinking? And
I don't, but I can imagine one. I can imagine a person actually inside Microsoft who was regarded as, this sort of really up and coming kind of guy. And that person, if he had glommed onto it, I think the managers would have gotten excited about it. He wasn't even there at the time I was doing the GenderMag thing, but I just remember this, this was like the golden child. Everybody was sort of, watching whatever he wanted and sort of making it better. So that would be a situation in which the grassroots starting would have attracted the other thing. But I haven't actually seen it in action ever. The things that have taken off have always been somebody at the top, not necessarily saying GenderMag matters, but saying I want everybody to be working on diversity and inclusion as part of their day jobs, and it's part of what I'm going to evaluate you on, or I want you to do this. Yes, it's in your day job. Without that, I haven't personally seen it succeed. But it doesn't have to be the CEO. I mean, it can be the UX lead. It can be the team lead, but it has to be somebody who somehow controls how the people below can regard their day jobs versus this new thing. Yeah.
Hello.
Are we done? Hi.
Hey, thank you very much for the talk. It was really helpful. You mentioned kind of towards the end that you're building a bank of best practices, which sounds very, very useful, specifically to me. I was wondering, it sounds like a massive undertaking, how you can keep those useful enough while still being general enough that they can be applied across such a wide range of software products.
Question mark? Yeah, you're right. But lucky for me, I have a grad student. You're right that it's really hard. We have We have an, sorry, I hope she never hears this. We have an overly general set of best practices now, which are better than nothing. And we have some overly concrete best practices, which are so concrete, I don't think they're useful yet. But then we have some that are about the right place, like the pinnable tooltips that generalize across a lot of different kinds of applications and, and come together with this information processing style in a really obvious way. So we're hoping to be able to get more of those. And it's a big field effort. And if you want to help, that would be awesome. I don't mean you have to gather data. I mean, just do stuff and share how that's going for you. And yeah, so my grad student is constantly interviewing people and sitting in on their GenderMeg sessions and trying to pitch in and help whenever she knows something from somebody else who has allowed us to share. So yeah, the more the merrier, please. She threatened to send me with a recording device she says, oh, are they going to do any sessions? Here, you want the recording device? But we only did a tiny little snippet of one, so I didn't bring it.
Okay, so personas have been developed by corporations for other products, and they're very expensive and they're used more or less. But where they are used, they're useful, but they often have bias because they characterize what people think their users look like.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that this is fascinating because it's an open source developed persona based on research. And that's really cool.
Thank you. I think it's cool too.
Yeah. When you start adding in, well, how do people of different privilege levels or accessibility or age, it expands it. And I assume that eventually there'll be research that will allow that kind of persona so that you could debug in different ways.
Yeah, I love this. I wish I could do it. I want to do with that. Yes. Is that the question? Am I going to do this?
Well, no, the question is it just a further issue of facets along the lines of the way different people think, or I don't know. That was where would you look? Is it just facets? Is it research? Is it accessibility? Is it all of the above?
Yeah, I think it's a really hard question. What you just asked is a hard question. And, I mean, it's an intersectionality question. And we haven't gotten that far yet, but it's so important. So far, the best we've been able to do is not that great, which is, we say, okay, we can look at things by gender. We can look at things by age individually. We can do this thing, and then we could do that thing, and then we can do that other thing, say socioeconomic level. But what we haven't even started trying to figure out is how can we do it all together? And there's already research that shows that if you do it in the way I just described, first this one, then this one, then this one, but all independent, you miss stuff. So that is definitely not the right way, but it's maybe a baby step before we get to the right way. And I don't know the answer yet to the right way, but it's a really important question, and one that I hope somebody, maybe me, will get to. But it takes a village, I mean, like, the more the merrier. Yeah.
All right. I think we answered our questions. So join me again in thanking Dr. Burnett so much for all her time.
Thank you for coming.
I didn't get a chance at the beginning, but Matt, who is standing in the kitchen, right there, our fearless recruiter, is here. I've had a few of you reach out to me about working here at New Relic, and can I have my other relics raise your hands? The rest of my folks work here. Great. So if anyone wants to hang out and talk to us, we have think 40 or 50 open roles right now in our office alone. And we'd love to talk to anybody who's interested in working with us. And otherwise, I hope to see many of you at our November 5th distributed tracing event or at an event between now and then. But thank you again so much for spending your Monday night with us. And let's thank Dr. Burnett once more.
Thank you.